is so wonderful to be here with you. It is great to be back in Colorado after being in the swamp for weeks and weeks. It is wonderful to actually shake hands with people who know how to put them to work. You know, boys, men, gentlemen, your hands are a lot rougher than the hands that are all squishy and soft in Washington, D.C.
Okay, I want to touch on something. Republicans always love to fantasize about themselves as these sort of like rugged, hard-working men. But also, if you actually look at the demographic breakdown of Republicans, they're disproportionately wealthy relative to Democrats or people who are on the left more generally. And so, they're not really the outdoorsy tough guys that they often present themselves as. And I just think that that is something that is deeply hilarious about the way the Republicans conceptualize themselves.
And I notice a lot of ruggedness here at the Western Conservative Summit. Lots of Western hats, boots. I haven't noticed any men in lipstick or dresses, so I guess that means they're not serving Bud Light.
Oh wow, a transphobic joke. Oh my goodness. What's even funnier is the fact that nobody laughed. But no, of course these conservatives have to throw random hotshots at trans people in general and also Bud Light for some reason, which I think is just really funny because it's a bit that Republicans just keep going back to, even though most people genuinely do not care. It is actually something that has proven to be deeply alienated for the Republican Party to keep focusing on, and it is actually causing them to lose election. Republicans in Michigan hyper-fixated on harassing trans people during their campaign, and Democrats in Michigan now have a trifecta in the government. So I guess congratulations, Lauren Boebert. You have your one joke. Very impressive.
But we are here gathered because we love our country, because we love freedom, because we believe that there is still something here that is worth fighting for, and we will not surrender the liberty that we have in the greatest nation this world has ever known.
Okay, is this where I mentioned that China has eliminated extreme poverty, but the United States hasn't? I mean, what benchmark do we really measure greatest country in the world? I personally like to measure countries based off of how the poorest people in the country are doing, and it turns out that the poorest people in the United States are doing very, very terribly compared to basically any Western country, definitely compared to countries like China. I mean, really any socialist country, you're gonna have the poorest people in society a lot more well taken care of than the poorest people in the United States. So I am just really curious about where this term greatest country is really coming from.
Our founding fathers were men of faith, and they put their faith on the line.
Is this where I mentioned where a lot of the founding fathers were very much atheists, or very least agnostic?
And our founding fathers, they knew that God said, if you declare a thing, it shall be established. And so they declared their independence from tyranny before they were ever free.
Okay, the deep, deep shamelessness of suggesting that the founding fathers weren't free when they were literally incredibly wealthy people in a colonial empire is just on its face ridiculous, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of them were literal slaveholders. You know, something Republicans like to just gloss over. But ultimately, this speech has a very, very common thread. And that thread, ultimately, is fascism. Now, fascism relies on a particular type of sort of fantastical self-image and falsified nostalgia for a past that never really existed. So, first and foremost, they create a false image of themselves as being these strong, outdoorsy, tough guys, when in actuality, most of them are just guys in suits that are like accountants or something like that. And like a lot of middle management types and a lot of like used car dealership owners, things like that. You know, people who basically got a job because their dad got them that job and they're wealthy because of that. And it turns out there's a lot of people like that, and in some sense that is the core of the Republican Party. That's why they have so much money to dump into ridiculous things like anti-trans ad campaign. But then you go into the false nostalgia, this false idea of, oh, the United States used to be this like perfect like Christian country, and you know, the founding fathers, they like declared independence, and that's when they became free. Except for, of course, all of the people that they literally enslaved. But that false history really is meant to beg the question of, what do we do to bring back this false history? How do we recreate this false history? And that leads into the very clear fascist element of what the modern Republicanist Party is actually trying to do. They're trying to create this false nostalgia. They're trying to create this sort of worshipping of toughness and ruggedness, pairing that with notions of violence, in order to really instigate their base into terrorizing marginalized people. Because Republican politicians know that their policies are not going to actually help the average person. And so in order to make up for that, what they have to do is make people feel powerful, despite the fact that they're not actually looking to give regular people power. What right-wingers are actually trying to do is just support the interests of giant corporations. And so they create this false past, and then they demonize specific people in different marginalized communities in order to get their base to victimize them and terrorize them, whether it be systematically or through individualized violence, in order to create this climate of fear and terror, in order to stoke up, once again, the interests of big businesses. And they pitch this idea that they need to recreate the greatness that once was had in the past, when the United States was truly a great country. Because, of course, we're already the greatest, but we should be the greatest in the way we were before. And so that obviously illogical pairing of sentiments is used to fuel this genocidal violence that fascists always push for. It is used to justify an extreme amount of violence against marginalized people. It is used to justify the criminalization of the existence of marginalized people. It's used to justify stripping rights away from people. And it is used to stoke the same types of fear and terror that instigates the sort of randomized terror attacks that the extreme right has been going about over the past few decades, and realistically has always been doing throughout the history of the United States. And so I guess in that sense, Lauren Boebert is speaking to something that very much is at the heart of the United States of America. Because since the very, very dawn of the United States, we have always had right-wing tyranny. There's always been both randomized and systemic violence from the political right to subject marginalized people to a constant state of terror and oppression. Whether it be the institution of slavery or lynch mobs, or the current system of randomized vigilante violence and the prison industrial complex. All of these things are fundamentally designed to create a sense of fear for marginalized people. And that is exactly what Lauren Boebert is trying to instigate and escalate in this speech right here. And is exactly why it is appropriate and necessary to identify the Republican Party today as fundamentally a fascist party at its core.